As the year draws to a close in Loch Dhu, a man is found dead before the bells can ring in the new year. Hamish Macbeth soon learns that some endings are far more dangerous than beginnings. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And if you enjoy settling into these Highland mysteries, subscribe and make this part of your nightly ritual. Only 11% are subscribed while 89% aren't. Your support truly means a lot. Rain struck Hamish Macbeth's shoulders in thin, mean needles as he pushed open the door of Patel's shop. Lug slunk in ahead of him, shaking himself hard enough to splatter the floor. Mrs. Patel gave the dog a long-suffering look, but said nothing. She was staring at the man at the counter instead, a tall English fellow with a pink face and a suit that looked too new for Loch Dhu. "This is it?" the man demanded. "No champagne, not even a half-decent brandy, and look at this." He snatched up a tin of shortbread as if it were something offensive. "Tourist rubbish." Mrs. Patel's mouth tightened. Hamish felt the eyes of the queue slide toward him. They expected him to deal with it, as if he had trained all his life for handling loud Englishmen. "You'll find better manners if you go looking for them," Hamish said, taking the tin from the man and putting it back. "Folk here don't care for shouting." The man gave him a sweeping glance. "And who are you?" "Police." Hamish tapped his dripping cap. "And this is the village?" "Well, it's backwards," the man muttered. "Victor Trescott. I'm staying at the hotel. Thought the Highlands had standards." "They do," Hamish said, guiding him toward the door. He felt the heat of embarrassment rising under his collar. The whole queue was listening, most trying not to let him see they were enjoying it. Lugs gave a soft warning growl as Trescott brushed past. Outside, Trescott shoved his hands deep into his pockets. If this place wants tourists, it might start behaving like it. Hamish shut the door on him and heard Mrs. Patel sigh as though he had let in a cloud of midges. The queue murmured again, but no one thanked him. In Loch Dhu, no one thanked you for doing your own job. By the time Hamish trudged toward the Kirk Hall, gossip had already outrun the rain. A crofter stopped him on the road and asked if it was true the Englishman had offered to buy half the hill farms. Another said Trescott had been in the bar the night before, boasting he would own half this dump by summer. Hamish said it was probably just drink. The crofter gave him a pitying look. At the hotel, Trescott was leaning over the reception desk, a glass in one hand and a small white tablet in the other. "Water," the manager was saying. "You should take those with water, sir." "Nonsense," Trescott said, dropping the tablet into his mouth and swallowing it down with whiskey. His hand trembled slightly. Hamish noticed it and wondered why a man who needed heart pills would provoke half the village before dinner. Trescott caught Hamish looking and raised his glass as if to mock him. "Don't fuss, officer. I know my own limits." Hamish doubted it. Night came quickly, carrying more rain and a raw wind that shoved through every gap in the Kirk Hall roof. Inside, the place was crammed with villagers trying to look festive. The Saleith band was tuning up in short, sour bursts. Lugs lay under a chair near the wall, his head on his paws, watching everything with suspicious eyes. Trescott was already on the floor, weaving between dancers with a glass he kept trying to refill himself. "I'll buy the hotel," he shouted at no one in particular. "I'll buy all of it. I'll make this place worth staying in." A few villagers laughed, but most glared. Hamish tried to keep an eye on him without looking like he was doing so. He felt as if the whole hall was waiting for him to fail again. The hotel manager passed by, shrugging helplessly. "If he keeps shouting like that, we'll have no guests left by morning." Hamish muttered that people had survived worse, but even he didn't believe it. Trescott had the talent of making everyone feel smaller, and Loch Dhu hated anyone who tried that. As midnight drew close, the hall grew louder. People shuffled toward the door for first footing. Someone spilled beer across the wooden floor, and the smell of it mixed with damp wool and peat smoke from the hall's tired old fire. Hamish stood near the band, trying to look interested in the fiddler's frantic tuning. Then Trescott lurched up beside him. "Macbeth," he said, poking Hamish in the shoulder. "You're a lazy sort. You could do with some modernisation yourself." Hamish stared at him. Trescott's face was shiny with sweat. His hand shook again, though he tried to steady it on the edge of a chair. "Maybe you should take another one of those tablets," Hamish said. "I'll do as I please," Trescott said. "This place needs a man who can run it." The countdown began. People shouted the numbers and someone opened the doors so the cold air swept in. Lugs rose stiffly and pressed against Hamish's leg. Trescott lifted his glass to make another ridiculous toast, but he staggered forward instead. The glass slipped from his fingers and rolled across the floor. He made a strange sound, half cough, half sigh. Then he fell. He fell straight at Hamish's feet, landing hard, arms splayed out like a dropped scarecrow. For a moment, several people laughed. It looked like a drunk collapsing for the fun of it. Then the bells rang, deep and echoing through the doorway, and the laughter died in a tight, crawling silence. Luggs whined, his body low to the floor. Hamish bent down and touched Trescott's shoulder. It was stiff, too stiff. "He's not getting up," someone whispered. Hamish felt the weight of every eye in the hall. He wished he could disappear behind Luggs, but Luggs tried to disappear behind him. The new year had come to Lochdu, and it had brought a dead Englishman with it. The villagers were still gathered in a thick, stubborn knot near the door. No one wanted to be first to leave. They looked from Hamish to the body and back again, as though he might suddenly announce it had all been a silly misunderstanding, and the Englishman would leap up and shout, "Happy New Year," like a fool. "Home," Hamish said. "All of you. Go on." They went, but slowly, with the guilty air of people who wanted one last look. Mrs. McLean crossed herself. A pair of tourists whispered too loudly that they had never seen a real Scottish death. Luggs gave a low growl at them, which helped them out the door faster than Hamish's words. He shut it behind them and turned the key. It made a hollow little click that sounded far too final. The hotel manager appeared beside the chairs, smoothing his waistcoat as if tidiness might erase the problem. He crouched near Hamish, lowering his voice. "Best say it was his heart, Hamish. He drank enough to drown a goat. Folk die at the bells all the time." Hamish looked at the body. Trescott's face had already gone slack. He wished the man had taken better care of himself. He wished he had kept him out of the Cayley. He wished for many things that were too late. "You don't want Strathbane crawling all over the place," the manager whispered. "It's the worst start to a year we've had." Hamish grunted. He felt the old weight settle across his shoulders, the one that came whenever someone's livelihood looked ready to crumble. He did not answer the manager because he had nothing decent to say. Outside, a car door slammed. Luggs stiffened. Hamish opened the hall door a crack. Blair was already striding up the path, Anderson a few steps behind him, notebook flapping in the wind as usual. Blair pushed into the hall without pausing. "Trust you to let a guest drop dead in your care, Macbeth," he said. His lip curled in a way that made Hamish long for a broom to hit him with. "He fell before anyone could stop him," Hamish said. "Heart failure," Blair announced, as if the pathologist had whispered it to him in advance. "We'll put that down. No fuss. You didn't see him choke or anything, did you?" Hamish almost said yes, simply to get Blair out. Instead, he muttered, "He was drunk." Anderson began wandering about, bumping into chairs. He nearly stepped on the fallen whiskey glass. Hamish bent and picked it up before Anderson could break it. The glass was damp with whiskey, but beneath it was a faint, sharp smell that did not belong. Hamish held it closer and frowned. Poison? Medicine? Something else? "Macbeth," Blair barked. "Don't start your tricks, leave that." Hamish set the glass carefully on a table behind him. "Just tidying." It was a lie. A quiet, small lie, but a lie all the same. It slipped out too easily. He knew at once he would have to keep up with it. Blair walked a circle around the body, pretending he knew what he was doing. Heart gave out. "That's the report. We'll tell Daviot he collapsed from over-enthusiasm." The hotel manager nodded too quickly. Yes, exactly. No need to frighten people." Hamish hated seeing the relief on the man's face. It made him feel weak. He stared at the whiskey glass on the table, its rim catching the light in an unpleasant way. Something in him tightened. By the time Strathbane carted the body off and Blair had shouted his last insult of the night, the hall felt hollow and used up. Hamish went back to the table, lifted Trescott's whiskey glass, and wrapped it in a bit of cloth from the kitchen. He slipped it into his pocket before anyone could see. Hamish locked it again and walked back to the station with Luggs trotting silently beside him. He did not sleep. Morning came with a grey, flat light that made Lochdu look older than it was. Hamish walked to the post office, hoping for quiet. He found a tourist talking loudly to Mrs. Hamilton, who nodded as if every word were law. "I heard the man was threatening to ruin some crofter," the tourist said. "Overland. Said he'd buy him out and toss him off the hill." Mrs. Hamilton sniffed. "That's what they say." Hamish felt a sting of irritation. Rumour travelled in Lochdu faster than rain on the loch. People latched onto it like midges on bare skin. "That true, Macbeth?" Mrs. Hamilton asked with a little smile. It was the smile of a woman who already believed she knew. "I've not heard any proof," Hamish said. "Proof is for city folk," the tourist said, as if he were an expert. "You locals know what he meant to do." Hamish wanted to say something sharp. Instead, he stepped aside to let another villager in. He saw heads tilt together as he left. Lugs trotted close, glancing back at them as if checking whether they were following. The whole village was brewing its own story, and it was the wrong one. If Trescott had been poisoned, someone was using rumour as a shield. If Trescott had simply died, the village would blame anyone but themselves. Hamish stood in the middle of the road, feeling the cold air nip at his ears. If he backed Blair's version, he would be letting the killer slip away. If he fought it, Strathbane might strip him of every bit of authority he still held. Either way, he would be alone in it. Lugs nudged his hand. Hamish rubbed the dog's head but did not speak. He looked toward the hotel, then toward the Crofts, then back at the hall. Everywhere he looked, someone would accuse him of choosing wrong. It was a bad beginning to the year. He felt it in his bones. And the worst part was that the year had barely started. Blair arrived in Lochdu before Hamish had even boiled water for tea. The man thundered up the main road as if he meant to knock down every house on his way. Lugs growled from inside the station, hackles risen. Hamish felt much the same. Something was already wrong. Blair never came this early unless he meant trouble for someone, and trouble for Hamish most of all. "There you are, Macbeth," Blair shouted the moment Hamish opened the door. "I'm looking for Ian McCrae. Drunken brute. Been threatening folk." Hamish blinked at him. "Ian?" "Aye, your pal the Crofter. Word is he was rowing with that dead Englishman all night, though in Lochdu word is often meant someone made it up." Blair jabbed a finger toward Patel's shop. "Folk in there heard all about it." Hamish doubted it. Folk in there often heard things that had never happened. But Blair was already stomping across the road, eager to perform. Hamish followed because if he didn't, Blair would cause more chaos than a winter storm. Lugs padded at his side, uneasy. Inside Patel's shop, Blair filled the doorway like a great sulking boulder. Mrs. Patel straightened behind the counter, her expression polite but cold. She disliked Blair even more than Hamish did, which was saying something. "Where's Ian McCrae?" Blair demanded. "You must have seen him." Mrs. Patel gave him a long look. "People come and go." Blair snorted. He threatened the victim. Everyone's talking about it. He said everyone, as if it meant the whole of Scotland instead of one gossiping tourist. Hamish tried to soften the blow. There was only a wee exchange about land prices. Blair swung to him. "You calling my witnesses liars, Macbeth?" Hamish shrugged. Maybe they heard wrong. A tourist standing near the biscuit said, "I heard the man, officer, quite nasty. Said he'd see the Englishman dead before selling a patch of ground." Hamish felt anger prick at him. People heard what they wanted. Ian liked to complain, but he wasn't the murdering type. Still, Hamish said nothing. His silence made Mrs. Patel's mouth purse. She clearly thought he should defend the Crofter. He should have. But Blair was glaring at him, and some part of Hamish, some weary, stupid part, wondered if perhaps Ian had lost his temper more than usual. Trescott had a talent for provoking even sober men. Blair turned triumphantly. "Where does he keep himself?" Mrs. Patel gestured toward the pier with a stiff hand. He was heading that way. Blair was already out the door. Hamish muttered an apology that Mrs. Patel didn't bother to accept. Lugs trotted ahead as if desperate to escape the tension. At the pier, the wind bit at Hamish's ears. Ian McCrae stood near the boats, hauling a net into a heap. He looked up, saw Blair, and went pale. "You!" Blair grabbed him by the arm before Hamish could stop him. "You threatened that Englishman. You were seen rowing with him. Admit it." Ian jerked away, but Blair held tight. Lugs growled, low and dangerous. "I never threatened him," Ian snapped. His voice wavered. Several fishers had stopped what they were doing to watch. Lochdu never missed a public humiliation. Blair smirked. "You said you'd see him dead before he bought your land." "I did not," Ian said, cheeks reddening. "I only told him the land wasn't for sale." He looked at Hamish then, almost pleading. "You know me, Hamish." Hamish should have spoken up right then, should have said he knew Ian lost his temper, but he wasn't a killer. Instead, the earlier doubt tugged at him. He said weakly, "Just answer Blair's questions at the hotel. Best to clear things." The fishers glanced at one another. The message was plain enough. Hamish Macbeth was siding with Strathbane. Ian's face twisted in anger and humiliation. He shook off Blair's grip, but followed anyway, shoulders hunched. At the hotel lounge, Blair puffed himself up and waved a paper triumphantly. "Witness statement," he said. "Tourist saw you near Trescott's Glass before midnight." Ian stared at it. I was nowhere near his drink. Blair folded his arms. "Tell that to Daviot." Hamish watched Ian flounder. The crofter wasn't clever enough to defend himself against Blair's bullying. Hamish knew that. He knew Ian was too muddled to keep track of times and places during a ceilidh, yet he didn't speak up. The glass? Hamish thought of the smell he'd noticed. He hadn't told Blair about that, which made everything worse. He was lying to protect the village, but the lie made Blair's case against Ian look stronger. A couple of tourists lingered at the lounge doorway, eavesdropping. Hamish felt the familiar sting of embarrassment. He wanted to shove them out, but he knew they'd only gossip louder. Blair clapped Ian on the shoulder hard enough to make him wince. "We've got our man, clear as daylight." He strode to the telephone on the wall and dialed Strathbane. "Daviot? Aye, we've identified the prime suspect. Macbeth agrees." Hamish's stomach tightened. He had not agreed. He should have spoken up. But Blair's voice rolled on, pleased with himself. Hamish muttered something under his breath that even he couldn't understand. When the call ended, Blair turned to Ian. "You'll stay put. Don't try slipping off to hide." "I'm no murderer," Ian said quietly. Blair dismissed him with a wave. "We'll see." Hamish followed Blair outside. The cold air hit him like a reprimand. A couple of villagers stood on the pavement already whispering. The story had taken root, and it would spread faster than anything Hamish could control. "Macbeth backing Blair," one of them murmured. "Poor Ian." Hamish pretended he hadn't heard. Lugs pressed against his leg, trembling with leftover tension. Hamish stared out toward the grey stretch of the loch. He hadn't defended Ian. He hadn't exposed Blair's nonsense. And he hadn't told anyone about the strange smell of that glass. It was his first proper mistake of the case, and Loch Dhu already knew it. The first thing wrong was the noise. Hamish could hear it from outside the hotel, raised English voices, footsteps on the stairs, and the manager hissing like a kettle about to boil over. Lugs stayed close, ears tilted back. The dog disliked upset people, and there was no shortage of them. Hamish stepped into the lobby. The manager spotted him at once and strode over. His smile was the fixed sort used for tourists. His voice was not. "You've ruined us," he muttered. "Cancellations all morning. Do you know how many bookings we had for the week? Do you care?" "I care," Hamish said, though it came out quietly. "You let Blair turn this place into a spectacle, dragging folk through the lounge like criminals." The manager's face twisted. "Do you want us ruined?" Two English guests hovered by the brochures, pretending to read about boat tours while staring openly. One whispered, "That's the policeman, the tall one. Yes, that's him." Hamish felt heat creep up his neck. "Blair acts on his own," he said. "I can't stop him barging around." "You should have," the manager snapped. "You're meant to protect Loch Dhu from Strathbane nonsense." Hamish did not answer. The manager stormed off, announcing loudly that he had proper work to do, which earned Hamish a few more sidelong looks. Lugs whined and nosed his hand. Hamish scratched the dog's head because he had nothing else to do with himself. Outside, the rain had turned the car park into brown muck. A woman in thin shoes glared at the ground as if Hamish personally controlled the weather. He almost apologised, then thought better of it. At the Kirk Hall that afternoon, the committee had gathered, which was never good news. Committees in Loch Dhu treated every minor decision as if it were a national crisis. The minister stood at the front, flapping a damp handkerchief. "This New Year ceilidh has become tainted," he announced. "We must consider whether to hold it at all next year." A few crofters shifted in their chairs. One said, "Maybe this started when folk invited that Trescott in. Outsiders bring trouble." "No one invited him," another replied. "He barged in himself." "And where was Macbeth?" someone added. "Supposed to keep order." Hamish sat on a hard wooden chair near the back, wishing he could sink into the floorboards. He cleared his throat. "I was at the hall, same as the rest of you." "Aye, and look what happened," muttered an elder. "You can't even keep your own village in order, Macbeth." The words landed sharper than the man intended, but he didn't take them back. No one did. The murmuring grew into a low fog of complaint. Tourists frightened, hotel in a panic, police from Strathbane throwing their weight around. It was all somehow Hamish's fault. He stood before anyone asked him to. "If you want the Taylith cancelled, it's your choice," he said. It sounded defensive, which he hated. The minister coughed. "We'll discuss it further." Outside, Hamish inhaled the damp air. It tasted of peat smoke and resentment. Lugg stayed close, watching him with droopy concern. By the time he reached Patel's shop, he only wanted a quiet moment. He got the opposite. Priscilla Halberton Smythe stood at the counter, straight and elegant as ever, accepting a wrapped parcel from Mrs. Patel. Her presence made the cramped shop feel smaller. "Hamish," she said, cool and polite, "is it true you think the death might not be natural?" Her eyes were steady. They always were. They made him feel like a schoolboy being asked whether he had broken a window. Hamish shrugged. "It's up to Blair." Something flickered in her expression. Not pity, not annoyance, just distance. A reminder that she belonged to a cleaner, brighter world. Her voice remained calm. "Father says the hotel can't withstand scandal. He's not pleased." "I suppose no one is," Hamish muttered. She inclined her head, took her parcel, and left without another word. Luggs watched her go, tail low. Mrs. Patel leaned over the counter. "That Trescott fellow tried to charm her parents, you know, going on about investment opportunities, acting like he owned the place already." Hamish blinked. "Priscilla's parents?" "Aye, talking of money, big plans. Folk like him never stop climbing." She straightened, giving him the sort of look a village gives its policeman when he's slow to notice the obvious. He wasn't just bothering crofters. Hamish left the shop with the remark stuck in his mind. Trescott aiming at the Tommel Castle Hotel was a different sort of ambition entirely. He'd thought the man was only pestering simple folk. That assumption seemed foolish now. He and Luggs walked back toward the station, though the walk felt heavier than usual. Everywhere he looked, someone was frowning or whispering. Lochdu had decided the new year had started badly, and Hamish Macbeth made a convenient hook to hang the blame on. He pushed open the station door and stood inside for a moment, listening to the rain tick against the window. Luggs settled beside him with a sigh. There would be another argument tomorrow, or another rumour, or some new mistake waiting to happen. The worst part was knowing he would not see it coming until it landed squarely on him. Hamish Macbeth stood in his station staring at the wrapped whisky glass, as if it might leap off the table and accuse him. The peat fire smoked badly, filling the room with a smell that made Luggs sneeze. Something was wrong with the chimney again, but Hamish had no patience to fuss with it. The glass lay in its bit of cloth like a guilty thing. He unwrapped it slowly. The bitter smell rose at once. Not whisky, not quite. Something underneath it. He grimaced. "Heart failure, my foot," he muttered. Luggs crept closer, nose twitching but unwilling to get too near. Hamish picked up the telephone and dialed Strathbane. Anderson answered, which was already a bad sign. "Pathologist isn't done," Anderson said. "Blair says stop pestering us." Hamish heard Blair shout in the background, "Tell that carrot-headed nuisance to stop playing detective." Hamish put the receiver down before he said something he'd regret. "If I wait for them, they'll bury the whole thing," he told Luggs, "flatten the truth under piles of forms." Luggs thumped his tail once, which Hamish took as agreement. He went back to the hotel, telling himself it was only to check on the guests. The manager met him at the door with a face like sour milk. "We've had 2 more cancellations," he said bitterly. "If you're here to drag another crofter through the lounge, don't." "I need to look in Trescott's room," Hamish replied. The manager hesitated, torn between authority and fear. "Fine, but be quick." The room was tidy in that hotel way, everything too clean, too polished. Hamish went through the desk because it was the only place a man like Trescott would put anything real. Inside lay a small ledger. Neat handwriting filled every page. Names of landowners, dates, little marks beside some entries. Colin McRae, Ian McRae, a fish processing firm in Strathbane. Ticks and underlines in a pattern Hamish didn't quite understand. So Trescott had been planning something large, not just buying a field, buying bits of the whole area. The manager stood in the doorway. "I've never seen that," he said quickly. Too quickly. Then he added, "Truly, I wouldn't lie about this." Hamish looked at him. The man's eyes showed genuine fear, not guilt. Fear of losing his job. Fear of more police. Hamish believed him, which was probably a mistake. He slid the ledger inside his jacket without a word. A small blister pack lay beside the bed. All the tablets were gone. Beside it, a note from a London doctor. avoid excess alcohol. Hamish almost laughed. Trescott had ignored that advice with talent. It could all be simple then. Heart trouble. Too much drink, no poison. He stared at the whiskey glass again in his mind. Too sharp a smell. Still, he let the simple explanation sit there like an easy chair, almost inviting him to rest. Downstairs, the bar was half empty. A young waitress wiped tables in a distracted way. It was Fiona Grant, the hotel waitress, always close enough to hear things, always pretending she hadn't. She glanced up at him. "You're still at it, then," she said. Hamish nodded. "Did you notice anything odd last night?" "Everything was odd," she said bluntly. "Folk were dancing like loons, that Englishman shouting, crofters glaring at him, and that woman." "What woman?" "Neatly dressed one from the Kirk Committee. She cornered him by the punch bowl, told him he had no right poking about in old business. He said something back, but I didn't catch it." Hamish felt a dull thump of annoyance at himself. He'd spent so much time looking at Ian, he'd missed half the haul. He'd been so ready to think Blair was wrong for the wrong reason that he'd half accepted Blair's nonsense anyway. "Who is she?" he asked. The girl shrugged. "One of the tidy church lot. They all look the same to me." She leaned closer. "You know, officer, it wasn't just the crofters who hated him." Hamish left the bar more unsettled than when he'd arrived. The ledger under his jacket felt heavier with each step. He had thought Trescott a loud, foolish outsider. Instead, the man had been scribbling down half the Highlands like sums on a page. Outside, the air smelled of wet stone. Lugs pressed against his leg, sensing the shift in mood. Hamish told the dog, "It's getting wider, and Blair will crow even louder because he doesn't see any of it." Lugs tilted his head. Hamish set off toward the road with no real destination. He had enough problems without deciding which one to solve first. All he knew was that his silence about the glass, the ledger, and the doctor's note had given Blair even more room to bluster, and Lochdu would blame Hamish for that as well. The night ahead felt long, too long. Hamish Macbeth knew something was wrong the moment he stepped out of the station. Lugs refused to move. The dog planted his paws and stared up the hill as if the croft itself might grow teeth. Hamish sighed. "Aye, I know. Folk up there never want to talk." The wind drove rain into his face in sharp, sideways bursts. It wasn't poetic rain. It was the sort that slapped a man for daring to investigate anything. By the time he reached Mrs. Morag Fraser's croft, his coat was dripping steadily, and Lugs had decided to trail behind him instead of at his side. The dog clearly wanted no part of the visit. Mrs. Fraser opened the door before he knocked. She stood with her arms folded, blocking the entrance. A tall woman, raw-boned, with a face that looked carved by years of weather and worse. "What do you want?" she asked. No greeting, no politeness, just irritation. Hamish cleared his throat. "Mrs. Fraser, I'm looking into something from Hogmanay. You had a bit of a quarrel with Mr. Trescott." Her mouth tightened. She stepped out onto the threshold so he wouldn't be able to see inside. "Folk talk too much in this place." "It's my job to ask," Hamish said. Her eyes narrowed. "Your job seems to be helping Strathbane." Hamish felt the sting of that. He hated when villagers lumped him in with Blair, as if they wore the same boots and breathed the same air. "I only want to know what happened," he said, "then ask someone else." She started to retreat into the house. Lugs growled softly. Hamish put out a hand, not touching her, just stopping her from closing the door. "I've no wish to bother you, Mrs. Fraser, but I need to understand what was said." She hesitated just long enough. Then she muttered, "He told me I'd pay for what happened that New Year." Hamish felt a flick of confusion. "Which New Year?" She gave him a hard stare. "Don't pretend you know nothing. It doesn't suit you." "I don't know," Hamish said honestly. "Then leave it." And with that she pushed the door shut with a firmness that made it clear she'd speak no further. Hamish stood a moment, rain dripping off his nose. Lugs pressed against his leg, trembling in that quiet dog way that said the conversation had been more than unpleasant. He walked back down the hill, though walked was generous. He slipped twice in the mud and cursed once, which only made Lugs wag his tail as if pleased to hear a human behaving honestly for once. At the post office, Mrs. Hamilton gave him a tight little smile, the kind that hid too much. "You're out in the weather early," she said. "Do you know anything about Mrs. Fraser talking with Trescott before the dance?" Hamish asked. Mrs. Hamilton fussed with a stack of envelopes. "Nothing to it." "You're sure?" "Aye. Just chatting. Folk are making more of it because that's what they do." Her tone was too firm. Whenever villagers insisted a thing was nothing, it was usually something. Before Hamish could press further, 2 tourists came in, forcing him aside. Mrs. Hamilton turned to help them, gladly escaping the question. Outside, the gossip caught him before he'd walked 20 steps. A pair of fishers hauling gear from a van called out, "Hear about Mrs. Fraser and that Englishman. Old lovers, they say." Hamish frowned. He didn't know anyone here until this holiday. "Aye, but love works strangely," one of them said with a grin, delighted with his own nonsense. "Maybe he left her heartbroken years ago." Hamish muttered something dry and went on. He doubted Trescott had ever loved anything except money, whiskey, and the sound of his own voice. Back at the station, Luggs shook himself violently, splattering droplets across the floor. Hamish picked up the phone to ring Blair, then paused. He thought of Blair dragging Ian McCrae about like a criminal, smearing him across the village, and he thought of Mrs. Fraser's hard eyes. Something in him balked. When Blair answered, already sounding annoyed, Hamish gave him an edited version. Nothing about Mrs. Fraser, nothing about the strange threat, nothing about the ledger either. "You're obstructing," Blair snarled. "Daviot'll have you moved if you keep this up." Hamish's throat tightened. "I told you what matters." "You told me nothing," Blair snapped. "Keep it up and you'll be packing." Hamish hung up without replying. Luggs looked at him with worried eyes. Hamish rubbed the dog's ears, though it did little to ease the weight on his chest. For all its rain, cold and gossip, he could not bear the thought of being taken from Loch Dhu. He sat heavily in his chair. Outside, someone shut a car door hard, as if the whole village had decided to slam its shutters at once. Hamish whispered, not to Luggs and not to anyone who could hear him, "This is getting worse." And it was. Hamish Macbeth knew something was wrong the moment the telephone rang. Nothing good ever came from Tommel Castle Hotel calling before noon. Luggs lifted his head from the hearthrug, ears pricked in that guilty way dogs had when trouble was near. Hamish answered, already bracing himself. "Hamish," Priscilla Halberton Smythe said in her calm, clipped voice, "Father's concerned. If this turns into the murder New Year, we'll lose the English trade. Could you come up discreetly?" Her tone made it sound like he was being summoned by a headmistress. "Aye," he said, though his stomach tightened. Tommel Castle was all polished floors and quiet money. He always felt as if he might leave muddy footprints on the carpets and be sent home again. He left Luggs in the Land Rover with the window cracked open. The dog gave him a miserable look as rain tapped the glass. "I'll not be long," Hamish muttered, knowing it was probably a lie. Inside, Priscilla was waiting near the reception desk, dressed in a pale suit that made Hamish feel immediately shabby. She handed him a small case. "The hotel is holding Trescott's luggage until his family decides what to do." Mother wondered if there was anything, well, dangerous. "Dangerous how?" Hamish asked. "I meant to the hotel's reputation," she replied. He opened the case. On top lay a packet of photographs bound with an elastic band. Hamish flipped through them. Most were holiday snaps. Trescott grinning beside various Highland views, Trescott at a restaurant, Trescott pretending to toast the camera. Then Hamish froze. One picture showed Trescott much younger, standing in front of the Loch Dhu Kirk Hall. Beside him, also younger, was Mrs. Morag Fraser. Both dressed for Hogmanay, both smiling stiffly, as if posing for someone they didn't entirely trust. Priscilla leaned closer. "That must be years ago, before I was even back from school." Hamish felt something cold settle in his chest. He had been wrong. Trescott hadn't arrived in Loch Dhu without connections. He had walked back into a place he already knew. Priscilla stepped away from him, already putting distance between herself and the unpleasant truth. "If this ties to anything old or sordid, please keep the hotel out of it." Hamish swallowed. "Did anything strange happen at Hogmanay years ago?" Her expression tightened. "I don't involve myself in village scandals, Hamish." It was a dismissal wrapped in politeness. He nodded awkwardly, put the photographs back, and closed the case. She didn't ask him to stay for tea. She rarely did. Outside, the rain had worsened. Luggs thumped his tail against the seat when Hamish returned, but even the dog could tell something was off. On the road back to Loch Dhu, Hamish gripped the wheel too hard. He told himself the photograph might mean nothing. People posed with all sorts at dances. He told himself Trescott could simply have passed through years earlier. He told himself many things he did not believe. At the pier, the fishers were repairing nets in the drizzle. They looked up at him with that mixture of curiosity and annoyance reserved for policemen. "Macbeth," one of them called. "Here the Englishman was sending postcards from Tommel Castle all week." Hamish frowned. "Postcards?" "Aye, from their postbox, as if he'd been here before and was greeting old pals." The man spat into the water. "Folk like that always think the Highlands are their holiday home." Another fisher chimed in. "Maybe he came back to settle some old score. Wouldn't surprise me." Hamish ignored that, though it lodged somewhere unwelcome. Gossip had a way of mixing truth with stupidity. Still, postcards from the castle's postbox were odd. The hotel was nowhere near the usual tourist trails unless Trescott knew exactly where he wanted to be. Hamish headed toward the station, boots leaving dark prints along the wet pier. Lugs padded beside him, glancing up every few steps. The photograph pressed against Hamish's ribs beneath his jacket like a quiet accusation. Someone in Loch Dhu had known Trescott long before the sailie. Someone had kept that fact from him. Someone might have had a reason to see him dead. Blair would not care. Blair already had his suspect and was likely bragging to Daviot that the case was nearly closed. Old photographs would not impress him. They barely impressed Hamish, though they frightened him more. At the station door, Hamish paused. The rain made the air thick, and the village lay silent in the way it did when everyone was waiting for someone else to make the next mistake. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, but the unease came in with him. It would not leave soon. Hamish Macbeth knew something was wrong the moment Anderson appeared at the station door looking even more flustered than usual. The man could barely tie his own shoelaces without panicking, so real panic meant trouble. Luggs lifted his head from the hearthrug, ears twitching. "Reports in," Anderson blurted. "Pathologist says poison. Rat poison in the whiskey." Hamish felt his stomach drop. He had known it, of course. Known it the moment he smelled the glass. But having it confirmed made everything heavier. Before he could say a word, the telephone rang. Anderson nearly tripped over himself grabbing it. "Yes, sir. He's right here." Anderson shoved the receiver at Hamish as though it were hot. Blair's voice blasted down the line. "Macbeth, you hid the main evidence. You trying to run your own cosy murder inquiry?" Hamish winced. He could hear muffled voices in the background, half of Strathbane listening in, and, worse, Daviot's clipped tones saying something sharp Hamish couldn't make out. "I didn't hide anything," Hamish said, which was technically true and practically useless. "You kept that glass back," Blair roared. "Anderson told me. You useless Highland scarecrow, you think you know better than us?" Hamish glanced at Anderson, who had the decency to look ashamed. "Sir," Hamish said stiffly, "You only interfered," Blair shouted. "Daviot hears every word. Explain to him why you hid evidence." Hamish opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Anything he said would be twisted. He hung up. It was cowardly, but it was that or start shouting back, which Blair would enjoy too much. Word spread through Loch Dhu with the usual speed. By the time Hamish reached Patel's shop, Mrs. Patel had already heard a dozen versions of the story. She didn't greet him. She simply crossed her arms. "People say you worried more about the hotel than the dead man." Hamish felt the words strike deeper than Blair's shouting. "That's not true," he muttered. "They say," Mrs. Patel continued, voice hard, "you didn't want the scandal, that you liked your quiet life too much to upset anything." Hamish felt his ears burn. Luggs slunk beneath the counter, pressing himself against Hamish's boots. Mrs. Patel leaned closer. "People trusted you, Hamish. Now they're wondering who you really look out for." He had no answer, so he took the dog biscuit she silently placed on the counter and left. Outside, cold air hit him like a reprimand. People glanced at him, then looked away. Loch Dhu liked gossip, but it liked blame even more. By mid-afternoon, Blair had dragged Ian McCrae into Strathbane. Hamish heard the news from a fisher on the pier who sounded almost pleased. "Blair says poison's just the sort of thing a crofter has lying about," the man said. "Easy case for him." Hamish felt a twist of frustration. Ian barely keeps track of his own socks. "Aye," the fisher said. "Blair thinks that proves his guilt." Hamish walked away before he said something unwise. He returned to Patel's shop, not for gossip this time, but for something practical. "I need to see your rat poison records," he said. Mrs. Patel looked at him as though debating whether he deserved such help. Eventually she produced a thin ledger. "Mind you," she said, "I don't want Strathbane blaming me for anything." Hamish scanned the entries. Mrs. Fraser, The hotel, the Kirk caretaker, several others he barely recognised. Everyone in Lochdu seemed to have bought rat poison in the last few months. He felt no relief, only more complications. When he stepped outside, Luggs gave him a mournful look, as if the dog already knew what was coming. Hamish didn't have long to wait. The telephone at the station rang as soon as he walked in the door. Daviot's voice emerged sharp enough to cut bread. "Macbeth, another mistake and you're finished. You are not a detective. You do not run investigations. You keep peace and file reports, nothing else." Hamish held the receiver away from his ear. "Yes, sir." "You obey Blair and stop interfering," Daviot snapped. "Strathbane cannot afford embarrassment." The line went dead. Hamish set the receiver down slowly. Luggs crawled closer and rested his head against Hamish's knee. Hamish didn't move. His humiliation sat in the room like a damp fog. He wasn't a hero. Daviot was right about that. Hamish didn't want medals or attention, but he did want the truth, and all he had managed so far was to make himself the village fool and Blair's favourite target. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "We'll do nothing heroic then," he said quietly to Luggs. "We'll just look around, notice things." Luggs thumped his tail once, which was more support than any human had given him all day. Still the unease lingered. Hamish Macbeth had always liked being invisible, but now Lochdu saw him clearly, and not kindly. Hamish Macbeth arrived at Colin McRae's croft knowing the welcome would be poor, but even he hadn't expected the door to be yanked open before he knocked. Colin stood there, jaw tight, eyes red from wind or anger, or both. Luggs paced in a stiff half-circle behind Hamish, picking up every sour note in the air. "So you've come," Colin said. "You backed Blair when he grabbed Ian. Don't deny it." Hamish had no defence. "I should have stopped him," he said, though it sounded weak even to his own ears. Colin snorted. "Aye, well, it's too late for that. He's got Ian in Strathbane being treated like a murderer." "I'll get him out if I can," Hamish said, though he didn't know how. "I just need to ask something." "No doubt." Colin stepped aside in a stiff half-gesture that wasn't hospitality, more of a challenge. "Come in, then." The croft kitchen was small and warm, but the warmth didn't soften anyone. Colin's wife, Mary, stood by the stove, stirring a pot with enough force to break it. She glanced at Hamish once, then at Luggs, who hovered by the door as if he expected to be told off. Hamish kept his voice as even as he could. "Did Trescott speak to you about buying land?" Colin folded his arms. "Aye. Came here full of himself. Offered a price that'd make any sensible man suspicious." "What did he say exactly?" "That he wanted the hill. Said he'd build something. Didn't say what. Just that he had plans." Colin scowled. "Why's an English big shot that keen on Rough Hill? There's nothing up there but sheep and stones." Hamish nodded. "Did he threaten you?" Colin hesitated. A flicker only. "Not me. But he hinted he could make trouble over something that happened a New Year long ago. Wouldn't say what. Just smirked." Hamish leaned forward. "What New Year?" Colin's face closed like a door. "Ask someone else." From the stove, Mary muttered, "It was that road accident. Years ago. You'll have heard it from someone." Hamish turned to her, but she was already pretending she hadn't spoken. "What accident?" he asked. "Nothing," Colin said sharply. "Old tales. Don't start dragging that up." Mary shook her head. "Folk ended up in hospital. Folk who act high and mighty now." She glanced at her husband, who glared until she went silent again. Hamish felt the shape of something forming, something older than Trescott's greed. Shame, resentment, secrets no one wanted aired, and Trescott had used them as bargaining chips. He thanked them, though the thanks fell flat. Colin followed him to the door. "You may think you're helping Ian," he said, "but the village says you're only after crofters now, to make up for letting Blair walk all over you." Hamish had no reply. Colin shut the door before he could try. He headed toward the Kirk Hall, Luggs keeping tight at his side. The drizzle began again, thin and cold. Hamish didn't bother adjusting his collar. Lochdu was determined to make him uncomfortable. No sense fighting it. Inside the Kirk Hall, the caretaker was stacking chairs with slow irritation. He didn't look pleased to see Hamish. "I need to ask about Trescott," Hamish said. "You and everyone else," the caretaker muttered. "What now?" "You mentioned he wanted old records. What exactly was he looking for?" The man huffed. Session records, dance organisers, folk from 20 years ago, asked who ran Hogmanay back then, kept circling back to Mrs. Fraser when she was young and Councillor Kerr. I told him he was poking old business. Hamish felt the tug of recognition. Trescott hadn't just wandered into gossip. He'd been digging deliberately. Did he give a reason? Hamish asked. Aye, the caretaker said dryly. He said, every village hides something. Then he smiled that smile, the type who thinks he knows more than he does. Hamish left the hall with more questions than he'd entered. Rain pattered on the roof, dripping down the back of his neck as soon as he stepped outside. Luggs shook himself miserably. At the pier, 2 fishers were smoking under the overhang. They fell silent when Hamish approached, which wasn't a good sign. Evening, Hamish said. One nodded, then said, Folks say you're after crofters now, making up for letting Blair drag Ian off. That's nonsense, Hamish replied. I'm trying to clear him. Funny way of doing it, the other muttered. Hamish ignored the sting, but it clung to him. Lochdu's protectiveness was thinning. He felt its absence keenly. He walked slowly back toward the station, not thinking, just letting the drizzle soak in. He was no closer to the truth, but now he had threads pointing backward, not forward. Trescott hadn't been just greedy. He had come armed with knowledge, the worst kind. Knowledge of an old tragedy, wrapped in village shame. At the station door, Luggs pressed against his leg, tremoring faintly. Hamish rested a hand on the dog's head. Feels like we're the only ones not wanted, Hamish said quietly. The dog gave no answer, but Hamish didn't expect one. Hamish Macbeth arrived at Councillor Donald Kerr's house already irritated. The morning had begun with a broken kettle, a damp uniform, and Luggs refusing to come inside until dragged. Now the councillor's neat modern bungalow sat on its icy drive like a smug stranger in Lochdu, and Hamish disliked it on sight. Luggs sniffed the air, gave a faint whine, and stayed by the gate as if the place offended him personally. Hamish slipped once on the drive before knocking. The door opened almost immediately, as though Kerr had been waiting to pounce. Constable Macbeth, Kerr said with a polished smile that didn't reach his eyes. You've stirred up enough fuss over this Englishman. What now? Hamish swallowed the retort that rose. I need to ask about old New Year events. Years ago, around the time of the accident. Kerr's smile froze. Accident? I've no idea what you're on about. You mentioned it to the caretaker, Hamish said. Car on ice, after a dance. Kerr's jaw tightened. Nothing serious. All dealt with at the time. Hamish pushed, a little harder than usual, Blair's attack still stinging. Who was involved? Don't start this, Kerr snapped. I'm not discussing village gossip with you. Before Hamish could reply, Mrs. Kerr appeared behind her husband. She was sharp-faced, brisk, and looked Hamish over as if deciding where he might drip mud on her carpet. We won't have old business dragged up, she said. You'll do more harm than good. People are upset enough. I'm trying to stop more upset, Hamish said mildly, though the words tasted wrong. He wasn't convincing anyone, least of all himself. Mrs. Kerr folded her arms. Look elsewhere, Constable. Kerr made a show of politeness, though it barely covered his fury. Good day to you. The door shut firmly, not slammed, just final. Hamish stood a moment on the icy step, feeling foolish. Luggs, watching from the gate, let out a low growl. Hamish agreed with the sentiment. At the post office, Mrs. Hamilton was sorting envelopes and humming in that false, cheerful way villagers used when trouble was brewing. When she saw Hamish, her eyebrows rose. You've been to Kerr's, then, she whispered. Folks saw your Land Rover. Hamish sighed. Didn't get much. Mrs. Hamilton leaned over the counter. He used to drink too much at the Hogmanay dances. Everyone knows it. And he and Mrs. Fraser had a terrible quarrel one year. Something about her brother. Never got the full story. Do you think it matters? Hamish asked. Oh, it always matters, she said with relish. Those two hated each other. Wouldn't surprise me if one of them pushed that Englishman into his grave. Hamish winced. Lochdu loved to turn scraps into scandals. Kerr, the violent drunk, was an easy story, appealing in the way familiar sinners always were. But easy stories rarely helped. He left before she could embellish further and went straight to Patel's. Mrs. Patel, now accustomed to him, pushed the ledger across the counter without a word. Hamish flipped through. There it was. Kerr's name beside a purchase of rat poison. He looked up. Moles, Mrs. Patel said flatly. That's what he told me, though I've never seen a mole anywhere near his tidy garden. Hamish lifted the ledger slightly. Anyone else comment on it? Folk comment on everything, she said. But be careful, Hamish. You question a counsellor, you'll have Strathbane breathing down your neck next. He put the ledger back. That's already happening. Mrs. Patel softened, but only a fraction. Folk are torn, you know. Some say good on you for standing up to the big shots. Others say you're dragging us into more trouble. Can't please everyone, Hamish muttered. No, she said, but you're displeasing most of them at once. That's a talent. Hamish left to the faint sound of lugs whining outside, sensing the rising village tension better than any human. Snow had begun drifting down now, light but persistent, settling in thin patches along the road. Kerr's house, Mrs. Fraser's croft, the Kirk Hall. Hamish felt them all weighing on him. He walked toward the pier, though he didn't intend to. A couple of fishers called out to him. "Macbeth, hear you grilled the counsellor. About time someone did." Another added, "Aye, but you'll get yourself fired if you keep that up." Praise and warning in the same breath. Typical Loch-Dhu. Hamish gave a vague nod and kept on walking. He didn't want applause. He didn't want scolding. He wanted clarity, but the village insisted on layering every truth with rivalry and old grudges. By the time he reached the station, snow had begun to gather in stubborn patches along the windowsill. Luggs shook himself as they stepped inside, sending little flakes everywhere. Hamish paused in the doorway. Kerr angry, Mrs. Fraser silent, villagers whispering, Blair circling, Daviot waiting for a misstep. It all pressed in at once. He wasn't closer to answers, only deeper in old lies. He shut the door quietly behind him. Tomorrow would be worse. Hamish Macbeth began the morning already in the wrong frame of mind. Someone had shoved a note under the station door in the night. No name, just a shaky line. Ask Kerr what he did that Hogmanay. It was the sort of note meant to help and only made everything worse. Luggs sniffed it, sneezed, and padded away as if the paper itself were trouble. Hamish stuffed it in his pocket and headed down to the pier, where Kerr was inspecting his car tyres like a man expecting disaster at any moment. Snow still clung to the edges of the road, dirty and stubborn. Kerr looked up sharply when he saw Hamish approaching. "Oh, not you again," he said. "I've answered quite enough." Hamish should have started gently. Instead, with Blair's shouting and the villagers' muttering still echoing in his head, he said, "You bought rat poison recently." Kerr stiffened. "So? Half the village buys it." "And you had reason to keep Trescott quiet," Hamish pressed, "about that old accident." Kerr's face darkened. "Are you accusing an elected man while protecting drunken crofters? Is that it?" Hamish felt the regret even as he spoke again. "You knew Trescott before. You quarrelled with Mrs. Fraser at Hogmanay years ago." "You listen to gossip!" Kerr shouted. His voice cracked louder than he meant, drawing heads from the boats and shop doorways. A small crowd gathered. Fishers, 2 tourists, Mrs. Hamilton pretending she didn't care while leaning out her post office doorway. Kerr jabbed a finger at Hamish. "This is slander. You've gone too far." Hamish opened his mouth, but nothing sensible came out. His theory, so sure in the quiet of the station, now felt flimsy in the cold air. Still he pushed on, stubbornness winning over caution. You had access. You had reason. If Trescott threatened you— "I'll not hear another word," Kerr roared. The worst possible moment chose then to bring Blair roaring up in a squad car, Anderson clinging beside him like a damp scarf. Blair jumped out with triumph on his face. "Well, well," Blair crowed, "I hear you've got something to say about Councillor Kerr." He shot Hamish a look of delighted malice. "Seems you've finally been useful." Before Hamish could backtrack, Blair turned to Kerr. "Donald Kerr, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Victor Trescott." Gasps rippled through the watching villagers. Luggs let out a confused whine, backing into Hamish's legs. Kerr went white with fury. "This is absurd. Macbeth has fed you nonsense." Blair smirked. "Constable Macbeth made a very serious allegation, and I trust him to recognise guilt when he's not interfering." Hamish felt sick. He had never meant to accuse Kerr publicly, certainly not in front of Blair, who now strutted around as if he'd solved the case himself. Kerr was bundled into the squad car, shouting threats of solicitors and complaints. The door slammed. Snow slid from the roof in a soft, mocking thud. Blair gave Hamish a satisfied grin. "You've finally done something right, Macbeth, though I expect it was an accident." The car pulled away. Lugs pressed against Hamish's knee, ears flattened. Hamish could only stare after the vehicle, knowing full well this would unravel before nightfall. It did. By late afternoon, the phone at the station rang so violently, Hamish thought it might shake off the wall. He answered, braced. Blair's voice hit him like a blow. "He's got an alibi, you idiot." Hamish closed his eyes. "Kerr? Yes, Kerr. Half the village remembers him first-footing up and down at the bells. One woman swears he slipped outside Patel's shop at 5 to midnight and nearly broke his backside. He couldn't have touched the glass." Hamish gripped the receiver tighter. That small, precise detail hit like a stone. Blair continued, voice rising. "You embarrassed me in front of Daviot. Do you know what he said? Do you? He said, 'Why did you listen to Macbeth?' And I had no answer." Hamish didn't bother responding. "You and your daft notions," Blair snapped. "Next time keep them to yourself." He slammed the phone down with enough force to rattle the desk. Word of Kerr's arrest and release spread through Lochdu at once. Mrs. Kerr marched around the village telling anyone who paused long enough that the local policeman was a menace who ought to be replaced by someone with sense. Several villagers nodded along sympathetically, then whispered behind her back that Kerr had probably deserved a fright anyway. A couple of fishers clapped Hamish on the shoulder as he passed. "Good on you, Macbeth. Councillor needed taking down a peg." Yet moments later, Mrs. Hamilton shook her head at him with disappointment. "You misled Strathbane, Hamish. That won't sit well." Even Mrs. Patel, usually steady, sighed as she handed him a packet of tea. "You're upsetting too many folk. It won't end well." Hamish walked outside with lugs trailing behind, the cold wind biting at their faces. Lochdu felt smaller than it had yesterday, and less friendly. He had accused the wrong man, publicly, loudly, in front of Blair, and somewhere the real killer had watched it all unfold. Hamish stood for a long moment in the snow, the village roofs hunched under the grey sky, lugs pressed against him, warm but uneasy. "Another mess," Hamish said quietly, and none of it helping. The dog only stared up at him with soft, worried eyes as the snow kept falling. Hamish Macbeth woke to the wrong sort of silence. Lugs wasn't snoring. He was watching Hamish with worried eyes, tail still. Before Hamish could wonder why, the telephone shrilled through the station like an accusation. He picked it up. Daviot didn't bother with greetings. "Macbeth, we are done. Funds are done. Patience is done. Wrap it up as a tragic poisoning by person or persons unknown." Hamish stared at the chipped paint flaking near the skirting board. "Sir, no more inquiries. No more theories. You've made enough trouble. File it and finish it." The line went dead. Hamish set the receiver down carefully, as if noise might bring Daviot roaring back. Lugs whined, pressing his head against Hamish's knee. Hamish scratched absently behind the dog's ear, but his mind was already elsewhere. Strathbane had washed its hands of the matter. He was meant to do the same. He did not. At the post office, Mrs. Hamilton was sorting envelopes with brisk, unnecessary force. When she saw Hamish, she froze. "Oh," she said, "I've something here for you. More for you than me." She reached under the counter and produced a brown envelope. The hotel's forwarding label was slapped crookedly across the front. "Found in that Englishman's things," she said, "but I won't send it on." Hamish frowned. "Why not?" "Because something's wrong with it," she murmured. "Feel the weight." He did. Too heavy for ordinary correspondence. "What's inside?" "I shouldn't say," she replied, which meant she already had. After a long moment of tight-lipped moral struggle, she sighed. "It's a cheque, large one, made out to cash, and a note in his hand, addressed to some English solicitor. It mentions final proof about the Lochdu New Year matter." Hamish felt his pulse quicken. "Why bring it to me instead of sending it?" "Because I don't want my name mixed in it," she hissed, "and because if I send it, you'll never see it again." He slipped the envelope inside his jacket. "Thank you." "It's not thanks I'm after," she snapped. "Just don't say you got it from me." Outside, Lugs sniffed at his boots, picking up faint traces of old paper and worry. Back at the station, Hamish telephoned the solicitor's number written on the enclosed note. A bored voice answered. "Yes, Trescott was a client," the man said. He handled private inquiries, matters requiring discretion. They often ended in financial settlements. I cannot divulge more. Did he mention Lochdu? Hamish asked. Not to me, the solicitor replied. He simply said he was closing a matter and expected resolution shortly. The tone implied a man confident he'd soon be richer, and someone had cut that short. Hamish hung up. He stared at the cheque again. Trescott hadn't been buying land. He'd been buying leverage, and selling it too. Later, at the Tommel Castle Hotel, Hamish found Priscilla in the hall arranging some flowers. She looked as composed as always, as if unpleasantness happened only to other people. I found something, Hamish said, keeping his voice low. A letter he meant to send. He was about to cash in on some old Highland business. Priscilla's expression did not change. If people behaved decently, she said, they wouldn't have to fear such men. Hamish bristled, quietly. It's not that simple. It usually is, she replied and turned away. Her coolness made him feel grubby for even mentioning it. Luggs, waiting outside, sensed Hamish's mood before Hamish did, and pressed close as they left the hotel grounds. The village, however, had no interest in subtlety. Mrs. Fraser was at her gate, scrubbing it as if polishing away gilt. She saw him, and stiffened. You should leave it now, she said. I can't, Hamish replied. You'll only bring more police down on us. We don't want Strathbane sniffing round every croft. Let it be. Folks die of poison by mistake too, you know. Not this time, Hamish said quietly. She shook her head sharply and went inside. At Patel's, 2 customers hurriedly stepped away from him, pretending they'd forgotten something. Outside the Kirk Hall, the caretaker gave him a curt nod and vanished before Hamish could approach. Even the fishers on the pier muttered less when he passed. Silence was a worse verdict than their usual teasing. By dusk, Lochdu had withdrawn from him almost entirely. Not in anger, worse, in caution. A policeman who annoyed Strathbane was a dangerous thing for a village that preferred its scandals whispered, not questioned. Hamish and Luggs walked back to the station. The sky was low, a dull grey lid over the rooftops. Luggs nosed his hand, uneasy. Trescott hadn't just threatened the village. He had named a price. Someone, somewhere, had decided not to pay. Hamish closed the station door behind them, the quiet settling like a warning rather than a comfort. He was alone now, without Strathbane's support and without Lochdu's trust. But the truth was closer. He could feel it pressing in, waiting for the next wrong step. Hamish Macbeth knew the day was wrong as soon as he stepped outside. Rain wasn't falling so much as being hurled at the ground in sideways sheets, and Luggs refused to leave the station porch, tail tucked, as though the whole village might bite. Hamish felt much the same. People in Lochdu had begun watching him the way sheep watch a dog they don't trust, heads low, waiting for trouble. He began quietly, asking about Hogmanay 20 years ago, as if it were a trivial memory, something harmless. The older villagers did not treat it as harmless. Mr. McLean pretended not to hear him at all, just kept talking about lambing, though there were no lambs due for months. Mrs. Cameron changed the subject 4 times without drawing breath. Every polite evasion made Hamish more certain he was closing in on something that should have never been opened. At the Kirk Hall, the caretaker was wiping down the tables with long, irritated strokes. He didn't bother hiding his annoyance when Hamish came in dripping rainwater everywhere. "Another question?" he muttered. Hamish kept his tone mild. "Just wondered about that Hogmanay dance years back, the one with the accident." The cloth froze in the caretaker's hand. "Folks said it was God's will," he said finally. "Young man stepped out on the road after the dance, car hit him. Nobody charged, nobody wanted charging." His voice had gone dull and old. "Ice, drink, bad luck, leave it." Hamish nodded, though it wasn't enough. "Who was driving?" "Ask someone else," the man snapped, then bent over his work with a vigour meant to end the conversation. It did. Hamish went next to Patel's shop. Mrs. Patel watched him come in with a tired look that suggested she expected him to ruin someone's morning just by existing. "What are you wanting now?" she asked. "Nothing particular," Hamish said, which fooled no one. She sighed. "If it's about that old Hogmanay, I don't know much." "You know more than some," Hamish replied. She hesitated, then said, "Mrs. Fraser stopped coming to the dances after that year, never set foot in the hall at New Year again. And Fiona Grant, she arrived around then, barmaid from nowhere. Didn't say where she was before, didn't want to." Hamish felt a small click in his mind. Not certainty, just a shape forming. Mrs. Patel narrowed her eyes. Don't go accusing decent folk out of loneliness, Hamish. People don't like old wounds reopened. I'm only asking, he said. She didn't answer. She just rang up his tea and looked relieved when he left. The rain pounded harder as Hamish walked along the loch with Lugs beside him. It wasn't a thoughtful walk. He wasn't brooding about feelings or guilt or purpose. He was piecing things together in that blunt, practical way he had. Fiona Grant had hovered over Trescott's drinks all night. He remembered that clearly now, always ready with another refill, always behind him, slipping between bar and hall with a speed that didn't match her usual laziness. And she had bought rat poison a month earlier for cellar vermin. A sensible reason. Perfectly normal. Too normal. Trescott had been digging into the accident. Mrs. Fraser's missing years, Fiona Grant's arrival, the old dance committees, the hotel's past. He must have come by newspaper clippings or gossip from someone too loose-tongued. Then he'd collected his proof, written his little note to the solicitor, and prepared to cash in. Someone had cashed in first. Gossip in Lochdu had shifted again, soured like milk. Now people said Hamish was dredging up grief to please Strathbane, though Strathbane had already abandoned him. Others whispered that if the truth came out about that long-ago accident, the wrong people would suffer. Grudges lifted their heads like startled birds. Old angers against the Frasers, the councillors, the hotel folk, even the dead young man whose name no one said aloud anymore. No one threw stones yet, but Hamish felt the village tightening. Doors shut quicker. Conversation stopped as he approached. Mrs. Fraser turned her back when he passed her gate. Fiona Grant pretended not to hear him when he greeted her outside the hotel. He had nearly all the pieces, scattered as they were. But proof was something else entirely. Proof required a door to open, and Lochdu was shutting every one of them. Lugs pressed close to him as the rain drove harder, the dog's unease matching Hamish's own. One wrong move, Hamish muttered, and they'll all go silent. Lugs whined softly. Hamish stood watching the loch churn under the hammering rain, knowing the next step would either crack the case open or close it forever. And he still had no idea which of the villagers' secrets was worth killing for. Hamish knew he had made a mistake the instant he opened the Kirkhall door. The decorations he had meant to tidy looked worse in daylight, sagging paper chains and limp tinsel that made the place feel cheap and abandoned. It was hardly the setting for anything sensible, but it was too late. People were already coming in, grumbling, suspicious, watching him as if they expected another blunder. Kerr was first. He stamped snow off his boots and gave Hamish a thin smile that held no warmth. Might as well hear what daftness you're up to now. Mrs. Fraser entered next, stiff-backed, jaw set, as though she had been ordered to appear before a magistrate. Fiona Grant drifted in after her, wearing too much perfume and pretending she hadn't noticed the others. A few more villagers appeared, those who had seen or heard enough on Hogmanay to matter, though they did not look eager to be helpful. Lugg settled by the door, but he kept shifting his weight uneasily, ears twitching as if the hall itself offended him. Hamish cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. Just wanting to go over a few things from Hogmanay. Fire exits, serving places, that sort of thing." No one believed him. They watched him the way sheep watch a man with a dog at his heels. He began walking through the hall, slow steps, pointing at corners and doors, mumbling things about safety checks. It was a performance so transparent he felt foolish, but it gave him cover. He stopped by the long trestle table where drinks had been poured that night. "Fiona," he said, with false casualness, "would you mind standing where you were serving the whiskey?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why? Looking for a spill I forgot to clean?" "Just for the picture of it," Hamish replied. She moved reluctantly to the corner near the kitchen hatch, folding her arms. Mrs. Fraser sniffed. "And you," Hamish said to Mrs. Fraser, "were near the stage when you spoke to Trescott. If you could just show us—" Her lips pressed tight, but she stepped to the spot, rigid, as if she refused to give him even the appearance of cooperation. Hamish nodded, looking around the hall. The decorations trembled slightly in the draught. Everything felt half alive, half rotting. "Funny thing," he said, keeping his voice mild, "how rat poison would be far easier to mix into a drink in a quiet kitchen, away from all this bustle, than out here on the floor." He did not look for answers. He looked at faces. Mrs. Fraser stiffened, but only with resentment. Kerr looked bored. The others merely shifted uncomfortably. But Fiona's eyelids flickered. Just for a second, a small tightening at the corner of her mouth. Hamish felt Lugg sit up a little straighter. He turned back to Mrs. Fraser. "You had reason enough," he said bluntly. "Trescott bringing up the road death. You knew who was driving that night. You keeping silent for years." The woman's face turned white, then mottled red. "Don't you dare," she snapped. "I tried to stop him driving. I begged him not to take the car." Everyone knew he wasn't fit to be on the road. That man, Trescott, he knew nothing. Nothing. She shot a glare at Fiona. "And she knows even less." It wasn't the denial that struck Hamish. It was the way she spoke of trying to stop her husband. A detail he had not heard. Not guilt, misery maybe, but her outrage felt too sharp to be faked. He had gone wrong again. Before he could adjust his thoughts, Fiona cut in, voice brittle. None of this would have happened if that boy had stayed on the pavement. The hall went very still. Even Lugg stopped moving. Mrs. Fraser turned slowly toward Fiona. "What boy?" Fiona blinked as though she wanted to swallow the words back, but couldn't. The one hit by the car, 20 years ago. Everyone knows that." "No," Hamish said quietly. "They don't. Most people only know there was an accident. Not who stepped off the pavement, not where, not how." He stepped closer, eyes on her, unless they were there, or someone told them, or they read something they shouldn't have. Fiona's face tightened. "You're twisting things." "I'm not clever enough for twisting," Hamish said. But Trescott was. He found something linking the hotel to the accident. Maybe old staff lists, maybe clippings, enough to write that letter, enough to get someone worried. A door slammed open. Blair barged in, puffing like he'd climbed a hill when it was only the short walk from his car. "That's enough," he shouted. "Another Macbeth performance. I've had reports. Interfering, questioning folk, dragging them in here." Kerr smirked. Mrs. Fraser looked vindicated. Fiona looked cornered. Hamish stayed where he was. Blair stomped closer, jabbing a finger at him. "You're done. Daviot'll hear of this. Playing detective again, frightening people, going beyond your remit." Hamish cut him off, voice flat. Trescott had proof. Proof tying the hotel's past to the accident. He meant to cash in on it. The hall fell silent. Even Blair paused. Hamish let the words sit there, incomplete, dangerous. He didn't need to explain. The silence did that for him. Every face in the room tightened with some private fear. Lugg's whimpered softly. Blair's mouth worked, angry but uncertain. The villagers looked at Hamish with a mixture of dread and resentment, as though he had dragged something foul up from the bottom of the loch. Hamish felt the moment slipping. Not solved, not controlled, teetering. Someone in this hall had killed Trescott, but not one of them would help him reach the truth. The hotel looked wrong the moment Hamish stepped into the yard. Too quiet. No clatter from the kitchen, no raised voices from guests who had drunk more than was wise. Only the flat dark of the loch behind him and the drip of water from the eaves. Lugg stopped at the passage, refusing to go farther, ears angled back. He had tolerated enough of the hotel these last days. Hamish pushed open the rear kitchen door. Fiona Grant was wiping down the counter with short, impatient strokes. She looked up, startled, then annoyed, then resigned. "If you've come to fling more theories at me, I'm done listening." He closed the door behind him. "No theories tonight. Just one question." He kept his voice low. She had the look of a woman who would lie if challenged, but might speak if left room to breathe. "Who refilled Trescott's glass before the bells?" The cloth in her hand sagged. She did not look at him. "You know I did." It was the first plain answer she had given since Hogmanay. Hamish walked a slow circle around the table, giving her time, though he felt the tension rise in the room like steam. "I know you served drinks. I don't know what you poured." She faced him then, not defiant, not frightened, just tired. "Whiskey? The same as everyone? Don't try to make it sound clever." "I'm not clever," Hamish said, "but Trescott had dug up plenty, enough to frighten someone." She barked a short laugh. "Frighten? He came waving photographs and clippings in my face, told me he knew all about the boy who died, told me he'd keep it quiet, for a price. He thought he'd found a gold seam." "So he knew your father was the driver." Her jaw tightened. "Everyone suspected something. No one ever proved anything. And then Trescott appears with his smug English voice and his folder and tells me he'll have the hotel off my father if I don't pay. My father would have been jailed back then. We'd have lost everything. You don't know what that fear is." He didn't answer. He could see her shoulders shaking slightly, though she held herself rigid. He waited. She went on, voice rawer now. "I only meant to make him ill. Just enough to put him to bed so he'd miss the bells. He said he'd dance his way to the bank. I thought a tiny dose would slow him down, not kill him." Hamish stood very still. Lugs whined softly from the passage. "What did you use?" he asked. "You know what I used," she said sharply. "The same thing everyone buys from Mrs. Patel, for rats in the cellar. I crushed a bit, stirred it in while topping his glass in the kitchen. Nobody noticed. People were everywhere. He drank it in one swallow." "But he didn't go to bed," Hamish said. "He laughed, said it tasted odd, then went back out to prance about like a fool. I kept watching him, waiting for him to look sick, waiting for him to stop dancing, but he got worse quickly. I hadn't expected that. Too pure, I suppose. Or he was weaker than he looked." She gripped the counter edge. "When I heard he died, I thought Blair would burn this place down to find someone to blame, so I said nothing." Hamish let out a slow breath. "Blair would have ruined you," he said simply. She looked at him with something like bitterness. "He still might." Hamish stepped back and reached for the wall phone. "Not if you tell it yourself." He dialed Strathbane. "Blair, you'd better come to the hotel." There was a burst of gloating on the other end before Blair even knew why he'd been summoned. He arrived 20 minutes later, steaming with triumph. "So, another Macbeth mess sorted by yours truly," he said loudly, as if the walls should applaud. He took Fiona's statement with the oily solemnity he reserved for moments he wanted reporters to print. He made sure to repeat that he had broken the case, though all he had broken so far was the patience of half the Highlands. When he left with the paperwork, he gave Hamish a sour smile. "Daviot'll be relieved. Press'll be pleased. Try not to meddle again, Macbeth." The kitchen door shut behind him with a bang that made Lugs flinch. Fiona sagged onto a chair. She did not thank Hamish, nor did he expect her to. The hotel would recover. Lochdu would talk for a while, then talk about something else. People would decide she had done a wicked thing or a necessary one, depending on who owed her money. Hamish stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, though the air still felt soaked through. The loch lay flat as slate. Lugs pressed close to his leg, nudging him toward home. Back in the station, Hamish made a pot of tea. The chipped cup wobbled slightly on the saucer. Lugs curled up by the hearth, sighing as though he had held in the whole village's troubles himself. The fire spat once, half-hearted. Hamish sat, long legs stretched out, staring at the paint peeling from the far wall. No promotion would come, no praise. Blair would claim victory, as usual. Lochdu would survive another scandal, and Hamish would be left with the familiar mixture of relief and disappointment that came after every solved case. The new year already felt old, and he could not imagine living anywhere else.